Well, it's Thursday night again, and you are watching Economics Unbound. Welcome to it. As always, I am not alone. I'm with my ever so stunning co-anchor, Nana. She will be with us in a moment. Well, coal has been instrumental in South Africa's development, not only for the mining sector, but also for the broader industrialization of our country. The coal mining industry has played a significant role in the development of other industries, such as the electricity industry, obviously, manufacturing, construction, and financial services. Now, coal remains one of South Africa's most abundant and valuable resources, with the country deriving over 82% of its electricity requirements from coal. The future of coal remains an urgent question, though, and it hangs in the balance. So tonight we unpack this issue and we ask, Kwa vadis, where to with coal?
Hello Tans, and hello to our viewers. Coal has become a very controversial topic in recent times, but remains an important commodity that still has a key role to play in the development of the economy in South Africa, as well as the country's future energy mix.
Yes, Nana, despite being an integral part of South Africa's mining industry and economy, negative views on coal and its impact on the environment have resulted in a sharp decline in the use of coal by major economies of the world. Hence, the decline in our exports, or the demand, therefore. Now, the reason being, coal emerges as a leading contributor to climate change and air pollution.
Yes, Tans, due to coal's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, many jurisdictions, including South Africa, have put in place strict environmental laws which have affected demand for coal. The South African government has ratified the Paris Agreement, which entered into force on the 4th of November 2016, signaling government's commitment to addressing the challenge of climate change. The agreement aims to restrict global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. This means that coal burning for power must decline rapidly, leaving the energy systems of advanced economies by 2030 and of developing economies by 2050.
Nana, this is a difficult question, but yes, Nana, government seems committed to investing in and making use of clean coal technologies in order to actively participate in the country's transition to a low-carbon economy. However, coal remains the cheapest baseload technology. This is supported by the 2016 Integrated Resource Plan for Electricity in South Africa, which shows that the levelized cost of electricity, which is called the LCOE, across the various coal technologies is lower than renewables. Now, if battery technology for renewables is taken into account, the LCOE increases significantly. Experts say when it comes to emissions arising from coal power generation, new technologies such as high efficiency, low emission technologies can be used to reduce greenhouse gases emissions significantly.
If you look at what coal mining means to South Africa, if we were to switch off today, it would be a disaster. Actually, we'll just shut off Mpumalanga. There would be no activity there.
Yeah.
So we're a major employer, and we bring in a lot of foreign currency.
Yeah.
Look, South Africa has actually been so lucky in having all the minerals that have served as a backbone of our economy.
Okay.
Now, without mining in the mix in our economy, our country is in trouble. It is against that background that we should look at coal mining in this current environment. Sure, you know, we're all looking at renewable energy and wind and the sun and everything else. There's a huge drive for that. And we also have to look as a country what really works for us.
Okay.
And the countries that are pushing this,
What works for them?
what works for them?
Does the issue that, I noticed that we have in South Africa about 200 years worth of coal underground that is still yet to be extracted. Does this mean that there's still an ample opportunity to use coal even though the rest of the world is moving away from it?
That's jobs. That's money. That's an economy, what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay? You don't just kill that and walk on it. We can't leave coal in the ground. I hear that a lot of people actually saying, leave it in the ground.
Yeah.
We've got lights here, everything is fine. This is coal. So we've got to think long and hard, when we want to actually move to these new technologies. What is that going to do to the country? That's very important. People are actually very, very important. If you're going to move away from coal to the detriment of human beings in our province and everywhere else, you're actually doing a disservice. Look at the countries that are actually saying now they don't want coal. Those countries generally have actually run out of coal. Coal has become very expensive for them to mine. They actually depend on countries like ours to actually ship coal to those countries.
Yeah.
Now, coal is available in abundance. Let's look at the economics of it. Coal is available in abundance in South Africa. It's a cheap energy source for us. South Africans know how to mine coal. They've been mining it for decades, if not centuries. They know how to do it. They are good at it, actually. So it's a serious competitive advantage for us. But what we're saying is, if coal is actually polluting, there are ways and means of dealing with that in this modern era.
Okay.
We can reduce carbon dioxide emissions. There are technologies that can do that.
Very interesting. However, global warming activists say there is an urgent need to address air pollution and the increasing competitiveness of renewables that are hastening change in countries that depend on coal.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
This is true, Nana. Even though the rise of global carbon prices and the shift towards gas as a low-carbon transition fuel are contributing to coal's decline, the collapsing cost of renewables can be the real game changer here. However, the idea that coal mining is a sunset industry was put to rest at a coal day held in Johannesburg recently. Take a look at this. Now, coal analysts argued that coal's outsized contribution to mining and the energy grid cannot be wished away, no matter how many wind turbines are erected in honor of our environmental correctness. In their presentations, they ran through numbers that made it clear that coal will be here for a long time yet. Coal is found in 70 countries and mined in 50 of them. At current rates of consumption, the International Energy Agency forecasts that coal will last another 114 years compared to 53 years for gas and 51 years for oil.
But Tans, global warming will continue unless all countries reduce carbon emissions. This is because most countries burn coal, which is responsible for about 45% of the world's carbon emissions. A recent report on the export outlook for South African coal by the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis states that new energy technologies will replace coal-fired power faster than most predict. It further states that there are already signs that major coal importers like India, Pakistan and South Korea are either transitioning from coal or have limited growth potential.
South Africa and Eskom are heavily over-dependent on coal. Something like 80% of all electricity in South Africa is generated from coal. This is too much, and it places South Africa at risk, especially in a world that is experiencing climate change, and we are experiencing massive pressure globally to do something about our overdependence on coal, to reduce our carbon emissions. The financial communities around the world are stopping lending money to the building of new coal power stations. Now, this does not mean that anybody is suggesting that tomorrow we must shut down all the coal power stations. That's not what anybody is saying. What people are saying is that we need a plan over a decade or even 2 decades to move away slowly from coal in a planned way, in a way that is just to the people that are currently dependent on coal in communities, that are in mining areas, that we need to put a plan together on how to transition from where we are now to where we want to be in 20 years' time. We've got time to do this. So it's not something that has to be done overnight. And the suggestions that we need to shut down the coal plants now are completely unrealistic. But what we can say is we've got too much coal in the mix. Therefore, we do not need to build new coal power stations. We can, in fact, allow existing coal-fired power stations to come to the end of their life, to decommission them one by one over these years, but to replace them with something that is not carbon intensive, that is not so dangerous to human health, that it does not use as much water and creates more jobs. So my belief is that we need a just transition planned over many years to transition from where we are now to where we want to be.
Yes, Nana, we really need to get more granular about what a just transition actually means. The shifting global dynamic has implications for South Africa's entire coal industry. Now, Nedbank, Standard Bank and First Rand have all indicated that they will not finance either of the 2 coal power plants planned for independent power producers, Thabametsi and Khanyisa, putting both projects at risk. Now, there are also reports that say that even with Eskom's new coal-fired power stations, Medupi and Kusile, slowly coming on stream, a significant portion of Eskom's old coal-fired plants are already in cold storage, that means mothballed, unlikely to ever come into service again. While decommissioning of the old operating coal power stations is set to continue into the years 2030 and beyond, this sparked concern, including in the ANC. The head of the ANC's Economic Transformation Committee, Enoch Godongwana, lamented the dearth of financing of coal mining and suggested that pension funds could be forced to invest in this area.
Tans, I read that Sasol is under massive pressure from shareholders, financial institutions and lenders to reduce its coal usage and carbon footprint. Its short-term plans include supplementing Eskom's grid electricity supply with renewable energy, as well as producing processed steam and replacing in-house coal-fired power generation with renewable energy.
Oh, Nana, despite all these, its environmental impact notwithstanding, coal is a practical energy option for fast-growing economies like China and India, which don't have large natural gas resources. These countries are determined to grow their economies and lift millions of people out of poverty, and to do it at the least cost possible.
That is bad. I guess the only way out of this will require the deployment of innovative coal technologies to mitigate carbon emissions. For now, let's take a short break. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to Economics Unbound. Coal mining analyst Xavier Prevost now joins us via Skype. Hi Xavier, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Welcome to the
Thanks.
SABC.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
Now, we are discussing the precarious future of coal. Clearly, it's going to need a lot of intricate policy work for us to work out what a just transition is for our country, South Africa, because we are heavily dependent on coal, and yet communities have begun to vocalize their objection to the health impacts that it's having.
Yes, it's true, but the reality is that coal, as other presenters before me had said, are actually not producing any impact in the environment. And on the other hand, now having what is called clean coal technologies, we can produce energy, electricity, without almost any impact in the environment. And that's something that's well known, well studied, and it's not something new that we are creating in South Africa. It's being used in other countries. It can be used here.
Now, two questions for you. What do we do as South Africa with the problem of coal ash? Because when you burn coal to generate electricity, you will always have vast amounts of coal ash. I understand it's the second largest environmental challenge in the United States, which has got access to all these technologies, and a famous spill brought this to the fore. And then secondly, we have communities that were as late as last week marching throughout Mpumalanga against the impacts that coal is having on their livelihoods and their life. How do you reconcile this with the view that coal is no longer causing health impacts?
Well, if you're talking about coal ash is a resource. It's not actually something that impacts the environment. Once this substance leaves the boiler and exits through a filter, it's actually totally inert. It produces no damage to the environment, and it can be used for many things. In the USA, and here too, we have a division at Eskom called Coal Ash Resources. And coal ash can be used for a number of applications, including concrete, plastic, etc., because those particles of ash that come out of the boiler are no longer just rough material. They become totally spheric by the power of the heat inside the boiler and can be used effectively in many industries.
Now, I was following reports from the United States that indicate that it has a number of known carcinogens. Those are cancer-causing agents, and it can be very toxic. Can you explain that? Doesn't seem to tally. Maybe there's some misunderstanding somewhere. Can you explain?
You can understand what's happening in America because the coal in America is a different kind of coal from the South African one. Every coal gets deposited in an environment where it attracts or doesn't attract some particles or elements that could be, as you say, carcinogen. Not in South Africa. We don't have any cadmium, mercury, any of those things that in America might cause problems. Here, our coal and our coal usage does not produce cancer. You see, for instance, in China, been reported that many places where coal use is intensive, many people have been reported to have cancer. It doesn't happen here. We don't have any report of any communities in Mpumalanga or elsewhere where coal has been reported to produce cancer.
We'll be playing some documentaries from those regions in Mpumalanga where communities themselves and their doctors and so on are reporting a high level of respiratory conditions among the local populations, especially the children. What could be causing that?
Yes. Respiratory conditions is a different story. What happens there is that you have smoke, not smoke from power stations, but usually smoke that's produced from households. People that use coal to burn in houses to produce heat or to cook. That coal produces low-level smoke, and that smoke produces serious respiratory problems, especially in children. But it's not from power stations, it is coming from household. And that's something that the Minister of Mines, when this is some years back, Kumsile was our Minister of Mines then, she reported this and she tried to implement a program to remove that household coal, which was bad quality, with a better quality fuel. Unfortunately, it didn't work because the funds were not available. So the program was abandoned. But that is the main source of problems with children and respiratory problems, is what they call township coal.
So am I to understand you clearly, are you saying that commercially burnt oil, coal, sorry, in our power stations, those huge 6-packs along Mpumalanga, are not a danger to the general population?
Correct. I'm saying that most of the coal that comes from power stations or is burned in power stations, it is exited through chimneys at high levels. It's not at the level where the population is. They are other elements, emissions that could affect humans are also somehow removed. Not all of them, but a certain amount of them is removed. So as far as I know, there is no impact in humans by power station. There is impact on humans of coal that's burned at low level by household, but not power station.
Thank you, Xavier. That's where we'll have to leave it for tonight. Thank you for joining us. It was most illuminating. That's where we will have to leave that particular interview, but join us after this short break. Miners, their families, and those that live close to the mine sites have been exposed to hazardous conditions that cause silicosis and tuberculosis, among others. Coal has been one of the culprits in South Africa. Now, South Africa's mineral revolution started in 1886 with the discovery of the largest industrial economic cluster of minerals, and at great cost to over 8 million Southern African miners. Miners have been ill-treated by the industry, experts say, and for decades they have not received fair compensation for fatalities at work, and there are no systems for supporting claims to date.
Soweto, the iconic birthplace of the 1976 student rebellion that led to the unraveling of apartheid in South Africa. Adjacent to the mine dams, the township is faced with health challenges. According to a study by David van Wyk from Benchmarks Foundation, mining impacts people and the environment beyond the confines of a mine and adds to the misery of mining diseases.
What happened under apartheid was very often black communities were put on the least profitable land, the least viable land, and that very often was land in which was in close proximity to mining. So you find townships like Soweto, for example, being in the shadow of a big circle of mines to the north of Soweto. Now, many of those mines have been abandoned. Some of them are being remined, and there's a lot of dust flowing off from those mine dumps into communities. Now, that dust contains uranium. It contains a whole range of other heavy metals as well, including lead, including arsenic and so on, which are really serious poisons. And we find that people living in close proximity to those mine dumps are becoming ill. Now, people did not go and live in Soweto by choice. They were forced to go and live there by the apartheid government, and so people are getting sick now from having from living there. And we feel that someone should take responsibility. The state and the mining industry should take responsibility, because very few of those people actually worked in the mines, but they are getting the same diseases that mine workers are getting, the same cancers, the same lung diseases, the same eye problems, the same skin problems, and so on that mine workers have. Mine workers are getting compensation. Mine workers won an out-of-court settlement for 5 billion rands for 500,000 workers that got sick from lung disease and so on in the mines. We feel that communities are entitled to the same kind of compensation that mine workers are.
But it was not just those working underground that have been affected. Those above ground also bore the brunt of mining ore, chrome, plus coal, amongst others.
We need to be having a conversation about whether we need mines at all in this country, because what's transpired, not just from today's conversation, but from a lot of studies that look at mining communities, is that mines have not benefited majority of this country. They've not benefited people in this country. So moving from one kind of mining in a time where we're talking about climate crisis, I don't think, to me, makes any form of sense, whether it's coal, whether it's technology. We need to move away from mining because they've not benefited people.
Earlier this year, at a coal conference in Cape Town, Minister of Mineral Resources, Gwede Mantashe, said that coal mining has always been the driver of the various industrial revolution. He said that depending on the role of coal in the revolution in question, coal had to be classified into various types that focus on several functions. It is coal that has kept the world's manufacturing sector going, particularly steel manufacturing. Coal-generated power has kept the world lit. Even though that this is the case, climate change is a reality faced today. Some environmentalists believe that doing away with mining completely and not just coal mining may be the best solution. Nothando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
For more, we are joined by Christopher Routledge, who used to be the Natural Resources Manager at Action Aid, and Groundworks' community activist, Thomas Nguni. Now, this is a very hot topic. I think I'm burning up, almost like I'm combusting like Medupi power station. Tell me, why is it that the discussion about coal and its future is heating up at this point, when Eskom itself is falling apart or having some dilemmas?
Thanks, Tandega, and good evening to listeners. I think it will be interesting to say it's not heating up now, but even before Medupi and Kusile, Groundwork and the coalition, which we call Life After Coal, which is made out of S-Life Africa and Center for Environmental Rights, we have always maintained that we don't need new coal in our system. But our government couldn't listen to that. And today we are seated with a crisis, both financial and in terms of health and our environment.
Why a financial crisis? May I understand where the financial crisis comes in?
Because right from the beginning, we knew that big infrastructure projects have a problem in terms of keeping up to the time frames, giving us the quality of service that we were looking for. And our government has been warned about this. But it's clear today that we're seated with two huge elephants. We have huge infrastructure
And which
problems.
are these two elephants?
That will be Medupi Power Station and Kusile Power Station. They were supposed to have been completed ages ago. And right now, they're not completed, but we're also seated with more than 450 billion rands in debt because of just these two coal-fired power stations.
Really briefly and succinctly, could you tell us about the work of Groundworks before I bring Christopher into the discussion?
So Groundwork is an environmental justice NGO, and we are operating throughout Southern Africa. And our major focus is to support community people to protect their rights, which is basically mentioned in the Constitution that everyone has the right to a healthy environment that is not harmful to his or her health and well-being.
Is that Section 35?
That's Section 24 of the Constitution.
Yes.
But we are also, like I said, part of Life After Coal, and basically Life After Coal seeks to encourage the decommissioning of coal plants, and this is merely done in the interest of human rights. So this is who Groundwork is, and basically we work with community organizations and community people to say we need change, and we need change that is just, because we have seen all over the years this economic system, which is too much focused on profits, did not address the needs of the people. So we need to change that trajectory and to say, how do we grow our economy such that we address the day-to-day needs of ordinary people?
Now, can I bring in Christopher? Christopher, the President and many people are speaking of a just transition. I have a sense, having read the different sides and the different opinions that have been written about a lot lately, that we're talking about different things, but we're all using the phrase a just transition, that it means different things to different people. Yes. How would you define a just transition under the umbrella of Section 24 and the Bill of Rights, which guarantees citizens a right to a healthy environment?
Tandeka, I think our analysis would start from the point of view that says that as a global world, as a global society, because, you know, South Africa, we have our little problems, but we are part of a bigger problem. And I think over the last month, we saw how this global climate crisis has really become a global issue. And so we have two real problems facing us, immediate and dangerous problems facing the world at the moment. But in South Africa, it's even more pronounced. And that is inequality and a climate crisis. And these two issues are converging in South Africa in a way that I think we should be very scared, and we should have this conversation, noting that it's an urgent conversation. So there are two things. Inequality in South Africa is deepening, unemployment is deepening, so we have a problem of creating jobs and work and equality in our country. And that problem is underpinned in a big way by the way that the mining sector has developed in South Africa, and the way that the vested interest in mining has really captured the economic think tanks.
So are you basically saying that because we've failed to transform who benefits from the economy and the fruits of South Africa's labor, and because we've got this uneven society, basically the rich can drive profits, can chase profits and pollute, and the poor suffer?
That's exactly it. So we have vested interest in coal mining.
But in that context, what is a just transition?
Yes,
I'm waiting for the
So that's kind of what I'm trying to get to. So in that context, we have this problem where vested interests are determining our drive to only have, like, this huge over-reliance on coal is driven by economic interest. Even though coal is not a job creator in itself, it has about 40,000, it creates about 40,000 jobs, which is 10% of the overall jobs in mining. And it is currently produces 50% of the income from mining in South Africa. So there's a huge imbalance in terms of the money that it generates and in terms of the jobs and the welfare that it generates. That's besides the health and economic disaster that it is for communities. I just wanted to make the point that your previous guest had said that there's no health concerns with regards to coal emissions, and that's not true. In a study that Groundworks actually did, we found that electricity generation was the cause of about 50% of overall health effects of people living in Mpumalanga, for example. So 50% of the people that are going into hospitals are complaining about health effects caused by electricity emissions. So that's a big way that the coal lobby distorts the truth. They distort the facts and they give the community and the public wrong information, which means that we make decisions based on wrong information.
Is there a strong coal lobby?
I would say that if it generates 50% of our revenue in mining, that is almost 4% of our GDP, I would say there's a very strong coal lobby. And so it is no surprise that the minister, for example, talks about something like clean coal. That's an impossibility. There's no such thing as clean coal. Coal is a dirty, fossil fuel driven energy source which has resulted in the climate change that we speak today. Our country is in a state of drought for the last 6 years. Do we think that that comes out of nowhere? We know that there is climate evidence to suggest that this is all part of the problem. So if we continue to think of coal as a dead thing that lays in the ground that we can extract at will, then we have learnt nothing from our colonial past. Because colonialism was based on that very idea that there is an abundance in Africa, let's go and exploit it. Nobody will know the difference and it won't make a difference. Today we know that the more you exploit without accounting for the full cost, you are going to head into a problem in the future. And the full cost involves the environment and involves the human cost. That is not accounted for in the beautiful budgets that they put together and the profits that they flight out of the country. That cost is not accounted for. Our government is paying for it through the hospital system.
But what about the efficacy, Christopher, of the emissions control technologies that can reduce greenhouse gases if we were to pay attention to cleaning up our coal burning habits?
Sure. So let me say that we are not radically closed off to the idea that there has to be a transition. All right, coming to your just transition point. So we understand that there has to be a transition. We think that there are technologies like filters that are important and useful. But look at Kusile and Mudupe. They are not using the proper filters. They've been given exemptions for reasons that I cannot understand. So we are not using the technologies available to us. So let's use those technologies that are available to us. But it's important that this idea that we have coal for the next 100 years, it's a dangerous idea that we can just take out of the earth and there will be no consequences. We have got to think about, we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, but we talk about it in every other sense except in the sense of energy creation. And that is a fallacy, and it's a big problem for our country and the world.
Now that's fascinating, but let's take a short break and we will continue with this interesting discussion after the break. Welcome back. I'm still joined in studio by Christopher Routledge and by Groundworks community activist. Let's get back into this discussion. We were still trying to get granular in terms of describing what it is that would be called in South Africa a just transition from coal.
So I think it's interesting. Christopher touched on, you were asking about how strong, for instance, is the coal lobby group. And quickly referring to what's happening, we live in a democratic society. But the question we need to ask ourselves is it a democracy wherein, just like in the past, ordinary people are still excluded from the decision-making process? And then the cost of mining, the cost of air pollution, it's still externalized to poor people. Is that the kind of democracy we were talking about, where decisions are still made in boardrooms? Cyril Ramaphosa is talking about a just transition today. The coal lobby group is talking about a just transition. But how did they come to a conclusion that this is what a just transition means without properly engaging with ordinary community people so that
Now,
they have a relevant input in this.
I understand, and we had prepared some of these visuals, that community members in September took to the streets in Mpumalanga, claiming that major companies, including Eskom, are polluting, endangering their water and their livelihoods as well as their health. What is it that is driving communities onto the streets if all that is said by the authorities that we will have a just transition, emission control is the way to go, we will phase out this dependency on coal because it's a commercial risk to the country? What's happening?
So let's look into the whole issue around emissions. I mean, we had to move away and transition to the new Air Quality Act and to the new National Environmental Management Act. But within that phase, we've seen most interested who were part of the process in terms of consultation saying, we cannot comply to this. And we've seen government intentionally working in cohorts with industries so that they disregard our acts that are supposed to protect the interests of the people.
So they're just allowing them to get away with ignoring the act?
Hence, they give them postponement. So we've got a clear system which indicates that we have a failing governance, especially in terms of environmental management issues. I mean, we've seen the report by CR pointing out how the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy and
why is government allowing people to get away with ignoring the act?
Failing to monitor and enforce compliance. I mean, we've got a clear policy that polluter must pay. We haven't seen that being implemented. So there's a clear failure in terms of government. But when it comes to equality...
But why is this failure happening?
Because they are being dictated to by industries more than listening to the people. So, for instance, if you look into the recent case we've done, we've taken the president, the minister, the MEC in Gauteng and Mpumalanga to court, and the National Air Quality Officer, Dr. Thuli Khumalo, to court to say, we need the priority areas, especially in the Highveld, to be declared. I mean, just a clear declaration that we are in violation of Section 24 because we're supposed to protect people's health, but we're not doing that, you know? And we need a clear implementation plan which will speak to monitoring and enforcement. Not just monitoring, enforcement is key in this. So if a company like Eskom and Sasol says we cannot comply, they must be penalized because we're doing that in the interest of the public health. We
now,
cannot
can you tell me about another
another
aspect of compliance? I know that on top of these coal mines are the power stations, the famous Eskom 6-packs. Now, once they mothball a power station and they're no longer mining from the mine underneath, do they seal these mines in accordance with the Act so that people's water is safe?
Now, this is where I think the whole issue to say we need to phase out coal comes into play. We don't need just to close the power station overnight. I mean, mothballing is a shortcut. We need a clear plan to say, if we close the power station, we need to decommission it, and this is the plan. Now, how do we deal with acid mine drainage that will develop in that area? How do we rehabilitate the land? How do we ensure that we reskill and retrain the workers such that we could create alternative job sectors and put them in those sectors? Because we need to think about the social welfare of the host communities. But in the current context, and we need to be fair about this, a transition is happening right now, but it's not just. So that's why we're saying mothballing, that's why we're talking about some of the units being closed and we don't know whether they will be opened because we're taking a shortcut. What we need to do is for our government to say by 2020 or 2024, we will be closing these power stations. But before we do that, let us have a plan, not just a business plan. We need a collective. So with the current process wherein government is saying they will close some of the power stations, it's not for environmental reasons. We need to be clear. This transition is not happening because we want to protect human rights. It is happening because we did something wrong by trying to build Gusile and Medupi. Now we find ourselves in a financial crisis. Now all of a sudden, we say in order for us to deal with that financial crisis, we need to decommission some of the power power plants so that we ensure that some of the plants for Eskom runs.
Okay,
but that's
so,
not fair to ordinary people.
So, Christopher, from what is being said by Groundworks, I'm beginning to get a sense that the key pillars of the just transition would be coming out of coal over a period of time. It would be enforcement of the Environmental Act. It would be better calibration of the dynamic between people, environment or earth, and commerce. And he's also saying that it would also involve reskilling and the development of other industries, a complete industrial diversification plan. Absolutely. So does he differ much from your perspective?
No, I think is spot on. I would just add that the way that we could possibly think about a just transition is to say that we come from a history of colonialism and exploitation. And post-1994, we haven't really changed the model of doing business in South Africa. We haven't changed the economic model. So the economic model is very much the same. We can see it in the numbers. The same people are still benefiting with a couple of added chocolate sprinkles on the top. But nothing has really changed. So if we want to think about a just transition, we have to change that colonial legacy. And that colonial legacy means that we have to involve more people in discussions about how do we move forward. Because there are interests and needs that are not accounted for in the way that it's currently decided. So there's a few people sitting at the top with the money deciding how do we take this money in the quickest, fastest possible way, and they're not involving other people. And this, even in your segment before this, and we did research around this, it shows very clearly that the communities living around mining are not benefiting. So we've got to find ways of doing things differently that is different from the old colonial model. And let's stop being neo-colonialist. You know, let's be a fourth industrial revolution South Africa that includes people.
Well, we've come to the end of our discussion. It has been a very interesting discussion. That was Christopher Routledge, who is the former Natural Resource Manager at Action Aid South Africa, and Groundworks community activist Thomas Nguni. Till next week, goodbye.